I never thought that college, with its classes and parties, could hide something truly terrifying. When I was accepted, I thought I was living a dream. It was a respected institution, incredibly hard to get into, known for its tradition. But I had no idea that behind this prestigious facade lay something much darker. In the first few months, everything seemed normal. I made some friends, attended classes, went to a few parties. In my group were Lucas, who always had a logical answer for everything, Mariana, who was too curious for her own good, Raphael, who was always joking but had a brilliant mind, and Clara, who was quieter but always seemed to know things we couldn't even imagine. Despite everything appearing calm, I always felt there was something strange in the air. The hallways were long, narrow, and some parts of the building hardly saw daylight. Many times, I found myself walking through these places, imagining how many people had passed through them before me, what they had seen, felt. It was during one of these wanderings that things started to spiral out of control. The others and I were exploring a rarely used wing, the kind where the lights always flicker and the air feels colder. Raphael, who could never stay quiet, was the first to suggest we investigate further. It wasn't uncommon, as we were always looking for something different to do. A door to a room was slightly ajar, and when we pushed it open, it creaked ominously. Inside, the smell of dust was strong, and the dirty windows let in only a little light. That's when we saw it. In the back of the room, half hidden among old books and yellowed papers, was a diary. It looked very old, with a worn-out cover and pages almost falling apart. At that moment, I didn't know it, but opening that diary would change our lives forever. There was something strange about it, something that made us sit right there, in the middle of that mess, and start reading. The first words gripped us. They spoke of secrets, of a story no one knew. If I had known what was coming, I might have closed the diary immediately. I might have left that room and never returned. But at that moment, curiosity was stronger. That's how we began to discover that college wasn't just a place to study. It was a place where terror was merely waiting to be awakened. That night, back in the dorm, the diary wouldn't leave my mind. Each of us reacted differently to what we read. Lucas was intrigued, as always, analyzing every detail with an almost irritating calm. Mariana was excited, fascinated by the idea of discovering more. Raphael, though trying to joke about it, I could see was disturbed. But Clara was the one who worried me the most. She remained silent, somewhat distant, as if she were trying to understand something even she couldn't explain. We talked a bit before bed, but the atmosphere was strange, heavy. It was as if deep down, we all knew we had started something that wouldn't be easy to stop. I tried to sleep, but I couldn't stop thinking about the diary, about Vicente, and everything we read. I closed my eyes, but I could only see that dark room, the diary open on the floor, and the feeling that something very old and dangerous had been awakened. The next day, at breakfast, everyone seemed exhausted, as if no one had slept well. And when we started talking, it was clear that the diary was on everyone's mind. "We need to find out more about this," said Mariana, breaking the silence. And despite all my doubts, I knew she was right. Curiosity had hooked us, and I knew we couldn't just ignore what we had found. The following morning, the mood between us was different. Everyone was absorbed by what we had discovered, and breakfast seemed like a mere formality before we returned to the mystery. The diary was on our minds, and no one seemed able to focus on anything else. Mariana and I headed to the library, while Lucas and Raphael went to explore the college archives. Clara decided to stay on campus, watching for anything unusual. The library was a labyrinth of shelves and old books. Mariana and I spent hours there, leafing through records and historical books. With each new discovery, the sense that we were dealing with something significant only grew stronger. We found a book about the college's founding, with notes on secret societies and rituals. The notes described practices that were eerily similar to what Vicente mentioned in the diary. In the college records, Lucas and Raphael found references to suspicious activities and secret meetings. There were mentions of student disappearances and unexplained events over the years. Everything seemed to be connecting in a disturbing way. That day was a deep dive into a past that the college clearly tried to hide. With every new piece of information, the weight of the mystery seemed to grow. The campus, which once seemed just a place to study, now had a threatening air, as if every hallway and every room was burdened with ancient secrets. Clara met us later, visibly worried. She sensed something was wrong, and despite our efforts to seem normal, the tension was palpable. We didn't know exactly what we were looking for, but with each discovery, the feeling that we were crossing a line increased. The diary seemed more and more like a portal to something we didn't want to face. Although we were becoming more involved, there was a growing sense that we were getting closer to something dangerous, something that was better left buried. As we walked back to the dorms, the weight of the discoveries seemed to manifest in us. The atmosphere was charged with an uneasiness that we couldn't ignore. Whatever we were about to discover, we knew it was beyond what we imagined when we started our investigation. The diary became a constant presence in our lives, and the feeling that we were delving into something much bigger and more sinister didn't make sense to our fears anymore. It was too late to turn back. What was to come was something that only time would tell. The following days were marked by a growing sense of unease. What had once seemed like a curiosity was now turning into an obsession. The diary and the documents we found had planted a seed of fear and fascination that we couldn't ignore. We needed to understand the ritual that Vicente mentioned and discover what was really happening. We decided that the next step was to try to learn more about the ritual itself. The library had given us some clues, but there were still gaps that we needed to fill. Lucas, always the most methodical, suggested we search for any reference to similar rituals in old texts. Meanwhile, Mariana continued her research on the history of the college and the Order of Twilight, while Raphael and I tried to understand the logistics and details of the ritual. One day, we found an old manuscript in a rarely frequented section of the library. The text was difficult to read, with old, blurry handwriting. But after some hard work deciphering it, we discovered a detailed description of the ritual that seemed to match what Vicente described. The description was graphic and disturbing, mentioning the need for specific components and a series of complex steps to complete the ritual. That's when we realized that the missing details were crucial. The manuscript mentioned a specific location to perform the ritual, something that coincided with an old building on campus that had been closed for years. The description of the location matched the vague description Vicente had left. We decided to go to the building to investigate. It was a place that always seemed a bit out of place, with an abandoned appearance and an air of desolation. The building was covered in dirt and cobwebs, and the feeling that we were invading a forbidden space was palpable. Armed with flashlights and the manuscript, we entered with the sense that we were about to discover something fundamental. Inside the building, things began to get stranger. The environment was filled with the smell of mold and disuse, and the feeling of being watched was constant. We explored the rooms, finding traces of old ceremonies, strange symbols carved into the walls, ritualistic objects covered in dust. Everything seemed as if time had frozen there. Finally, we reached a larger room at the back of the building. The room was in worse shape than the rest of the building, with worn walls and an altar in the center. The altar matched exactly the description we had found in the manuscript. The feeling that something terrible had happened there was almost palpable. With the manuscript in hand, we tried to understand if it was possible to perform the ritual in that location. The plan was simple but loaded with tension. We would follow the instructions in the diary and the manuscript, trying to recreate the ritual. The idea was to complete what Vicente had started and, in doing so, understand what had been unleashed. As we prepared the space, a growing sense of fear took hold of me. Every step we took seemed to bring us closer to something beyond our comprehension. The fact that we were so involved in something that could be so dangerous was unsettling. The thought that something could go wrong and that we might release something we couldn't control haunted me. But curiosity, now mixed with a deep sense of responsibility, drove us to continue. We knew that, somehow, we were close to understanding what Vicente had faced. And at the same time, there was a part of me that wished we could turn back before it was too late. Night fell over the campus, and the feeling that something was about to happen was almost unbearable. We gathered in the room we had found in the old building. Based on the manuscript and the diary, we began to prepare the space for the ritual. The atmosphere was charged with palpable tension. We placed the items we had found and those we had purchased following the manuscript's instructions. Candles, dried herbs, and carefully drawn symbols. With each step, the feeling that we were doing something wrong intensified. But on the other hand, curiosity and the need to discover the truth pushed us forward. Lucas was responsible for following the detailed instructions, while Mariana helped arrange the components on the altar. Raphael and Clara kept watch, observing the environment and ensuring that everything was in order. The silence was broken only by the sound of the wind passing through the broken windows and the occasional creaking of wood. As we prepared the space, the feeling that something was wrong intensified. The place seemed to take on a life of its own, and the cold we felt didn't seem to be just from the temperature. There was something else, something we couldn't explain. When we finally finished the preparations, I looked at the altar and wondered if we were doing the right thing. Finally, the moment arrived. As we began the ritual, a feeling of anxiety took hold of all of us. Following the diary's instructions, we started to chant the words in an ancient language. The lit candles cast dancing shadows on the walls, creating an even more unsettling atmosphere. At first, everything seemed to work as planned. The words we chanted seemed to resonate in the room in a strange way, and a growing sense of energy was almost palpable. However, as we progressed, the atmosphere began to change. The feeling of cold intensified, and the wind seemed to blow with increasing force, despite being inside a closed building. As we approached the climax of the ritual, strange things began to happen. The candles started to go out on their own, and shadows seemed to move across the walls, even when there was no wind. A low, strange sound, almost like a whisper, began to fill the space. The feeling that something was approaching was terrifying. I looked at my friends' faces and saw the same fear reflected in their eyes. The sense that we had invoked something beyond our control was inescapable. At the peak of the ritual, an invisible force seemed to manifest in the room. The candles went out completely, and a muffled scream echoed through the space. Desperate, we tried to finish the ritual as quickly as possible, but something seemed to be holding us back. The room was in complete darkness, and the whispers had become deafening screams. It felt as if something was closing in on us, an invisible presence that was becoming increasingly oppressive. When we finally finished, exhausted and terrified, the environment began to return to normal. The candles relit themselves, and silence filled the room once more. But something had changed. The sense of relief was accompanied by a deep fear, as if we knew that what we had done couldn't be easily undone. We left the building with a mix of relief and terror. Whatever we had unleashed seemed to have left a mark on us. Each of us was silent, processing what had just happened. The campus now seemed different, as if the very air we breathed was filled with a new kind of tension. As we returned to our dorms, the weight of the ritual seemed to stay with us, a constant reminder that what we had done had changed something, and that now we were all closer to facing the consequences of what we had unleashed. After the night of the ritual, the campus seemed to have changed. What was once just a place of study and fun now seemed to carry an invisible weight. I tried to follow the routine, but the feeling that something was wrong followed me with every step. Events began to happen quickly. At first, it was just small things. Books that seemed to move on their own, strange sounds coming from the hallways, and a constant feeling of being watched. The tension among us grew, and the fear that something was manifesting became almost unbearable. It was Clara who first noticed the real impact. She was in the library when she saw a vague figure out of the corner of her eye. She described the vision as a shadow that always seemed to be out of focus but emanated an oppressive presence. Her description sent a chill down my spine. It was as if her words confirmed our worst fears. The situation worsened when, one night, Lucas heard noises coming from the abandoned building. He and Raphael went to investigate but found nothing but crushing silence and unusual cold. However, Lucas was convinced that he had seen something, a dark figure moving quickly among the shadows. Our concern only grew. In an attempt to better understand what we had unleashed, we decided to review the diary and manuscript once again, looking for any detail that could explain what was happening. The notes were vague and difficult to interpret, but one thing was clear. The ritual had released something, and now we needed to find a way to deal with it. As our research advanced, we began to realize that things were getting out of control. The campus was filled with unexplained events and strange sensations, and the feeling of being followed never disappeared. It was no longer just a matter of curiosity. It was a struggle to understand what we had released and, if possible, how we could reverse the situation. We decided to seek outside help, something that had been a last resort until that moment. We found a paranormal expert who agreed to meet us and hear our story. In a tense conversation, we explained everything we had found and experienced. The expert examined the diary and the manuscript, and her reaction was a mix of confirmation and warning. She spoke about the Order of Twilight and the types of entities that these rituals could awaken. It was an ancient and malevolent force that could be manifesting physically and psychologically. She warned us that to reverse the ritual and possibly banish the entity, we would need to perform a counter-ritual. This ritual, much more complex and dangerous, required a deep understanding of the symbols and words we had used earlier. Moreover, we needed a specific location, a place where the energy could be adequately channeled. We felt a mix of relief and dread upon hearing this. Finally, there was a chance to correct what we had done, but the idea of performing another ritual was terrifying. Time was running out, and the sense of urgency was palpable. Whatever we had unleashed was becoming stronger and more visible, and we knew we would need to act quickly to avoid even worse consequences. With the expert's help, we began to prepare for the counter-ritual. The feeling that we were fighting something far beyond our comprehension was overwhelming. The fear that what we had released could become uncontrollable drove us to continue, even as despair seemed to dominate us. The truth was clear. What we had started was something we couldn't easily control, and facing what we had unleashed would require not only courage but a deeper understanding of what we were dealing with. And as we prepared for the counter-ritual, we knew that the battle was just beginning. Time was running out, and the pressure to resolve the situation was intense. With the expert's help, we began to prepare for the counter-ritual. The complexity of the process was alarming. The expert provided us with a list of components and rituals that we needed to follow to try to reverse what we had unleashed. The location for the counter-ritual needed to be specific, a place where the negative energy could be channeled and dissipated. The abandoned building seemed like the only suitable location, considering its connection to the original ritual. We returned there with a mixture of determination and fear. The environment was even darker and more oppressive than before. Every step we took seemed to intensify the feeling that we were being watched by something we couldn't see. The preparation for the counter-ritual was meticulous. We followed every instruction with the required precision, from the arrangement of items on the altar to the chanting of words in an ancient language. The air was filled with a disturbing energy, and the cold seemed to penetrate to the bone. As we progressed, the inexplicable events intensified. Strange noises echoed around us, and a sense of impending panic gripped us. When we started the counter-ritual, things began to go wrong. The energy in the environment seemed to resist, and the shadows around us became more aggressive. The wind howled with an almost supernatural force, and the sensation of being dragged into a different dimension was overwhelming. As we chanted the ritual words, a sense of despair intensified. It was as if we were fighting against something far beyond our control. What seemed to be the final phase of the ritual brought a series of disturbing manifestations. Objects moved on their own, and the candles went out unexpectedly. The sound of whispers and screams seemed to envelop the room, making it impossible to distinguish what was real and what was the product of our terrified imagination. The decisive moment arrived, and with it, the sense that we were about to face the worst. The environment seemed to have become a battleground between opposing forces. What we had unleashed was manifesting physically, like a force that wanted to claim what was its own. At the peak of the counter-ritual, the presence we felt became palpable. It was as if an invisible force was fighting against us, trying to prevent us from completing the process. The feeling of cold was cutting, and the darkness seemed to deepen. The fear was so intense it almost paralyzed us, but we knew we couldn't stop now. We tried to redouble our efforts and stay focused, even as the presence seemed to manifest in a more concrete form. The confrontation was brutal, a struggle between our will to correct the mistake and a force that seemed determined to remain free. Finally, after what seemed like an eternity, the environment began to change. The negative energy seemed to start dissipating, and the feeling of oppression gradually lessened. The shadows retreated, and the cold, though still present, was no longer as intense. The silence that followed was heavy but also filled with a sense of relief. We left the building exhausted, with a mixture of relief and deep fatigue. We had faced something that seemed uncontrollable, but we also knew that the battle was far from over. Whatever we had achieved, there was still a lingering doubt about whether we had truly managed to reverse everything or if what we had faced was just waiting for another opportunity to manifest. As we walked away from the building, the campus seemed to have an air of normality, but we knew that the experience had forever changed our perception of reality. What we had faced had left deep marks, and the feeling that something was still to come was constant. The terror we had awakened taught us that there was much more to the world than we imagined, and the future was uncertain. The dawn brought temporary relief but also a feeling of strangeness. The campus seemed normal, as if the previous night had been just a nightmare. However, we knew the reality was different. What we had experienced left us with a sense that, although we had faced something terrible, the battle was far from over. We spent the following days trying to return to a normal routine, but the experience left visible and invisible marks. Lucas, Mariana, Raphael, and Clara were more distant than ever, each dealing with what had happened in their own way. The feeling that something was always lurking never completely disappeared. We reviewed the diary and documents again, searching for any detail we might have missed, something that could help us better understand what had happened. The paranormal expert remained in contact, offering guidance and encouragement in dealing with the consequences. There was a sense that what we had faced was only part of something larger and more complex, something that could have long-term repercussions. The campus was never the same for us. The old building remained in a state of abandonment, but now, when we passed by it, the feeling that something sinister was there was inescapable. The college seemed to be trying to forget what had happened, as if a shadow remained over the place. Some nights, we heard rumors of other students who also began to notice strange things, although no one knew exactly what had happened. The experience brought us together in unexpected ways, but it also left us with a deep understanding of fear and fragility. Conversations about what we had gone through always ended in silence, as if words were insufficient to describe what really happened. The feeling that terror could manifest again was a constant shadow in our lives. Over time, we learned to deal with the fear and uncertainty. The college, though still a place of learning, now carried a memory of something that had changed our view of the world. What we had started out of youthful curiosity led us to confront forces far greater than us. And as we moved on with our lives, we knew that the truth about what had really happened would remain among us, a reminder that the terror we faced was only part of something much deeper and inexplicable. As we moved forward into the future, we carried the certainty that reality was much more complex than we imagined, and that what we had faced was a reminder that the unknown was always lurking, ready to challenge us again.